we'll start with this. Well, you might have saw my previous upload in which Melissa Odessa reacted to Amanda Serrano's upcoming rematch with Diana Santana, and how from where Melissa Odessa was sitting, it's just not a good look for the sport. How does a fighter who's 1-5 in their last 6 fights, lost their last 3 fights, how does a fighter like this get afforded a world title shot, a world title opportunity with a fighter that already beat them, that already knocked them out? In reference to that story, Amanda Serrano herself caught wind of the comments, caught wind of the story, reported here on the channel, and decided to reach out to me personally. A bold move, I know. It was rather unexpected. Better still, in the spirit of fair and balanced journalism, it's only right that Amanda's story get the airtime, get the same light
the other end got
that Melissa Odessa got. And what Amanda communicated to me in so many words is that the fight itself, tune-up fight that it might be, is more about helping out a friend, in so many words. That Diana Santana, without divulging too much in reference to the gory details, Diana is in a bad way and could use the opportunity. That's essentially what was communicated to me. And that's really why she's getting the opportunity, the financial opportunity. This kind of camaraderie between fighters and former rivals is not as alien a concept as it might appear to either I or you. It's not uncommon for fighters to develop friendships after having swapped punches in the squared circle. I vaguely recall a similar kind of story between Muhammad Ali and Joe Frazier. That's right. That being said, I don't find Amanda's side of the story all that hard to believe. I don't. It's entirely possible from where I'm sitting that that's why Diana Santana was afforded this opportunity. Was afforded to her as a showing of camaraderie, a showing of solidarity for someone who needs it.
And you guys can accept that story or reject it.
It's up to you guys out there how you receive this news. It's up to you guys what you want to believe and what you don't want to believe. But if you want my opinion, and you're here, so I'll assume that you do, yeah, I can believe that that's how Diana Santana got this opportunity, because short of that explanation, I can't see any other reason why she would have. I mean, think about it. This certainly doesn't reflect well for Amanda Serrano, taking on Diana Santana again in a rematch that nobody was asking for, a rematch that Diana Santana certainly doesn't deserve, not in the sporting sense of things. Diana Santana has lost her last 3 fights. Why the hell are you affording her an opportunity to fight for the WBO featherweight title?
A good look.
I mean, why are you fighting her again at all, you know? Especially after having walked away from the Katie Taylor situation.
A good look.
It's just not a good look, but the fight is underway nonetheless, and I can believe that, you know what? This is why it's actually happening, because behind the scenes, you know, there are friendships, there is camaraderie. It's not the first time I ever heard that 2 fighters, you know, one of the fighters was looking out for the other in some way, shape, or form, the way fighters do. But I guess the reason that so many people would feel inclined to look at this fight and criticize it is because it's not a good advertisement for the sport of women's boxing. You got a lot of guys out there that like to say that the reason the sport isn't popular, at least in this part of the world, is because on the women's end of it, there's no talent and there's no depth.
That's what they say.
This is, you know, what a lot of people like to say, a lot of the critics.
Too many mismatches.
That the girls overall, they're not as talented as the guys, and the few that are, you know, what they're fighting in are mismatches, that there just aren't very good or very many good fighters to go around in the sport of women's boxing, and nothing could be further from the truth. We talk about it here all the time. So when those critics see a fight like this, they see the frivolity in it and don't know the backstory, you get the same kind of knee-jerk reactions you would expect a fight like this to get. And that's why it's just not a good look for Amanda Serrano and not a good advertisement for women's boxing in this part of the world, regardless of why, because the average guy that sees this thing ain't gonna know the backstory, ain't gonna know how all of this came into fruition. And even if they do,
They'll talk shit.
they might still tell themselves that, you know, the situation is still farce, and by all rights, the rematch really shouldn't even be happening. It shouldn't be taking place. You know, I remember the reaction that the Senicia Estrada versus Miranda Atkins fight got a couple of months ago. And I told you guys, you know, a lot of people rushed to criticism in reference to that fight, And the only reason Miranda Atkins set foot in the ring with Senicia Estrada is because the girl that Senicia was going to fight, that opponent fell through. So they had to find someone on short notice. Miranda Atkins herself, a grown woman.
She decided to step up.
Even though by all rights, she doesn't belong in the same ring with Senicia Estrada. She shouldn't be allowed anywhere 50 to 100 feet near her. And, when Senicia Estrada essentially committed that mercy killing, because it didn't take her all but a few seconds into the first round to dispatch Miranda Atkins. Some people liked the knockout, some people didn't. The ones that didn't, they took to criticizing the fight and criticizing the sport of women's boxing as a whole for such a match even taking place. And I imagine that those same kinds of people, they're going to look at this fight and they're going to come to a similar conclusion. And that's why, regardless of why, this just isn't a good look for Amanda, and it's not a good look for the sport, because if you go in there and you blow this girl out of the water, yeah, you're just doing your job, you're just doing what you're supposed to do, and you are looking out for a friend. At the same time, it's a professional boxing match. The outcome of this match will be reflected in your professional record.
It will.
For a 7th division champion who hasn't lost a fight in a long time and only has one professional loss total, for a fighter like Amanda Serrano to be facing a fighter like this,
It's not a good look.
Regardless of why.
it's just not. So, while I do happen to believe Amanda Serrano's side of the story, the way it was communicated to me,
Yeah, I believe her.
this fight, it still isn't a good advertisement for the sport. It's not a good advertisement for Amanda, and it reflects poorly on all the aforementioned parties. It just does. And in the spirit of fairness and transparency, my reaction to this rematch that no one was asking for is identical to my reaction to Wilder's rematch with Luis Ortiz. A rematch that no one was asking for, like this is a rematch that no one's asking for. I felt that fight shouldn't take place the same way I felt that this fight really shouldn't take place.
If we're being honest.
With that being said, even if I do believe Amanda Serrano's side of the story in her own words, even if I do, this fight still reflects poorly on her and the sport overall. It's just not a good advertisement for the sport of women's boxing. And I know that these kinds of farcical fights take place in both men's and women's boxing.
They do.
Wilder versus Ortiz 2, which I just mentioned. Stevenson versus Fonfara 2, at a time when there were bigger fish to fry. While these kinds of farcical rematches that no one was asking for exist in both men's and women's boxing, overall, they're still not a good advertisement for the sport, regardless of why.
So you gotta take the good with the bad.
That's all there is to it. Some people are going to look at this. They're not going to like what they see. And Amanda and the events orchestrators, they have to know that. They have to realize that even if it's exactly the way Amanda says it is, this still isn't a good advertisement for the sport. I appreciate that Amanda Serrano reached out to me personally to divulge this information. And the most I can say, the most advice I can give is, get this thing out of the way and hurry up and put it behind you so that you can see about unifying in the following year. And so that this will all be a distant memory. In heavyweight news, per tweet from Michael Benson, Eddie Hearn has declared that they're targeting Anthony Joshua versus Tyson Fury for May 2021. Said he's very confident after positive talks with Bob Arum today. Few small issues to iron out, but I think we can start drawing up the contracts and get this moving. Read this and thought to myself, by May, hopefully the crowds will be back so you can get a full capacity audience to be in attendance for this thing just as well. If the fight date they're targeting is in May, perhaps that will allow Tyson Fury to have a little tune-up fight, a little gimme fight to shake off the ring rust before May gets here. Maybe in January, end of January. That would effectively resolve my biggest hang-up with the fight being next, that proposition that if the fight date, hypothetically speaking, is in May, well, it will have been well over 12 months since Tyson Fury swapped punches with anybody, and I find it hard to believe that he would enter into what is the biggest fight of his career without a tune-up, without a gimme fight, off a 12-month layoff. But if the fight date they're targeting is in May, I think that does allow Tyson Fury enough time to schedule something to go down at some point early next year, in January. Per another tweet from Michael Benson, Eddie Hearn on Wilder demanding a Fury trilogy, Bob Arum tells us Fury is contractually free to take any fight he wants. I do believe Wilder is appealing in the U.S. courts, but we don't expect that to be a problem. If Fury can't fight Joshua, AJ will fight Usyk. And just in reference to Alexander Usyk, that situation with the WBO, Alexander Usyk could be offered a deal to fight for the vacant WBO title. Alexander Usyk could be offered a deal that could see him box for the vacant WBO heavyweight title just weeks after an Anthony Joshua-Tyson Fury fight to ensure the undisputed world heavyweight title is on the line when the two British fighters box next year. Usyk, the former undisputed world cruiserweight champion, is the mandatory contender to Joshua's WBO title. Paco Vercel, the WBO president,
Yeah, I know.
we know he's standing on his square. Usyk has indicated that he is not interested in taking a step-aside deal and would likely face Joseph Parker or Joe Joyce for the vacant title if the WBO decided to strip Joshua of the title he first won from Parker in 2018. The last time there was a WBO mandatory fight at heavyweight was in 2017 when Parker beat Hughie Fury in Manchester. Not having the WBO title on the line is not a deal breaker for a Joshua versus Fury fight, but it is clearly preferable, as it would be the first time that the WBC, WBA, IBF, and WBO titles had ever been on the line in one heavyweight title fight. Hearn has a promotional deal with Usyk and could make him an offer that would see the WBO belt on the line for Joshua versus Fury before the winner drops the belt straight after. Hearn will even suggest to Usyk that a vacant title fight could be prearranged to take place as little as 2 weeks after Joshua versus Fury. And that more or less lends insight as to why it is the WBO and Paco Vercel have decided to become hardliners when it comes to this mandate, that Anthony Joshua has yet to satisfy a mandatory challenger for them since having won the belt from Joseph Parker in their unification match. It seems that the Alphabets decided on a rotation, and that rotation is based on, when Anthony Joshua's mandatory challengers are due. He won the IBF title first, the WBA title second, and the WBO title last. Thus, their mandatory has taken the longest to satisfy. Thus far, Anthony Joshua has satisfied 2 mandatory challengers for the IBF, one being Carlos Takam, who stood in place for Kubrat Pulev. Originally, it was supposed to be Pulev a couple of years ago, but Pulev got hurt and he had to pull out. Thus, Carlos Takam, the next highest ranked available contender, stood in his place. He was Anthony Joshua's mandatory challenger by way of the IBF. The next mandatory challenger Anthony Joshua was satisfied was for the WBA in Alexander Povetkin. After that, the next mandatory challenger was once again Kubrat Pulev, who we all saw in action, got smoked.
CIBF again.
But as far as the WBO, Anthony Joshua has not yet satisfied a mandatory for them since having won the belt from Joseph Parker in March of 2018. That being said, the names in the hat for Alexander Usyk to potentially challenge for what could become the newly vacated WBO title after Anthony Joshua locks horns with Tyson Fury are Joseph Parker and Joe Joyce. And out of those 2 names, I happen to think that Joe Joyce is likelier to get the fight than Joseph Parker because, in all likelihood, Joseph Parker will reschedule that Junior Fa fight, that domestic clash, for some time early next year. Junior Fa's surgery was a success, and I happen to think right now, as we speak, the wheels are in motion, or they will be very soon, to reschedule that fight. I don't know that Joe's going to be available to fight Alexander Usyk sometime in May or early June. I just don't know that. The other Joe, Frank Warren's Joe, the Joe that just jabbed the hell out of Daniel Dubois, that Joe, he might get the fight. This will be the sequel to Joe Joyce and Alexander Usyk's first fight in the World Series of Boxing, where Alexander Usyk effectively outpointed Joe Joyce over the course of 5 rounds, whereas this fight, this is in the pros. It's a 12-round title fight. You gotta wonder how the additional rounds could affect the outcome of such a match. That is, an additional 7 rounds that Alexander Usyk would have to work around the imposing size and volume punching of Joe Joyce, who has since amassed a lot of professional experience. Alexander Usyk as well at the championship level, but at the championship level as a cruiserweight, not a heavyweight. I think that, that's something to consider, that where Usyk might have had enough to outpoint Joe Joyce over the course of 5, does he have enough to do that over the course of 12? That makes things very Intriguing. And yet another intriguing, interesting element of this
Proposition.
development is that, say that the WBO title becomes vacant just a few weeks after the first Anthony Joshua versus Tyson Fury undisputed heavyweight title fight. If it does, and that title ends up on the line in Usyk versus Joe Joyce or Usyk versus Joseph Parker, regardless of which, if it ends up on the line in that fight, that means it won't be on the line in the second Anthony Joshua versus Tyson Fury fight. As in all likelihood, there are going to be two fights. This looks to be two-fight, maybe even a three-fight engagement. Pretty sure there's going to be a two-way rematch clause incorporated into the contracts, and that's basically saying that regardless of what happens in the first fight, whether Anthony Joshua wins or Tyson Fury wins, regardless of anything, the WBO title won't be on the line in the second fight. So the second fight won't be an undisputed heavyweight title fight. That essentially means that there could very well be two undisputed heavyweight title fights in the near future. Because Usyk wins the belt, somebody's going to have to go see him, somebody's going to have to deal with him.
Not just Usyk. The same applies if Joe wins it.
I mean, which Joe are we talking about?
Does it matter?
Well, no, not really. Let's just put it this way. Whichever Joe ends up beating Alexander Usyk, assuming Alexander Usyk gets beat, the look of it is, there may be one undisputed heavyweight title fight in 2021 between Anthony Joshua and Tyson Fury, and there may be another undisputed heavyweight title fight in 2022 once the smoke settles between Joshua and Fury, and once the smoke settles with Usyk and whatever guy named Joe he ends up fighting. And that is ample heavyweight action for the next 2 years.